Let's talk about stop motion equipment. Setting up for shooting stop motion. So you obviously need a computer. I'm assuming you already have one. You can use a PC or a Mac. I told you about some of those software programs that are available only for Mac or only for PC. So if you're planning to use one of those, make sure you have the corresponding computer. The Dragonframe software I just talked about, the student prices versus the full version. I'm not sure how you verify that you are a student, because sometimes with some programs, if you have a .edu website or a .edu email, then they'll say, okay, you're a student, great, you get to pay less. Other times, like for Amazon Prime, I had to get, I took a screenshot of some thing saying that I was officially registered for a class for the next semester, and that's how I verified my student status for Amazon. So I'm not sure how you have to verify that you're a student for Dragonframe, or if you can kind of just be like, trust me, I'm a student, whatever. So yeah, digital single lens reflex camera, DSLR. Usually Canon, like I said, you can get them, when I looked, you can get them as cheap as 60 bucks used. If you get a brand new fancy one, they can be as much as $5,000. Don't do that. Why? Buy yourself something much nicer with $5,000. So you need a camera power cord or battery pack. Again, I really recommend you get a power cord. Battery packs, once you get a camera on a tripod, it's hard to get the camera. You'd have to take the camera off the tripod to switch out the battery, and at that point you've moved the camera. So if you're in the middle of an animation and you put the camera back on, then you're never going to be lined up with where you were. It's a big hassle. So get one of the power cords, the adapter power cords. Those can be as cheap as 15 bucks. You'll need a tripod for your camera, unless you're really good at propping it up on books and stuff, which is not very, that's kind of scary, because then if you hit it, your camera goes flying somewhere. A tripod you can get for as cheap as 40 bucks and as much as like 100 bucks. Ideally, you want a really heavy, high quality tripod that's going to like stay put. But if you can only afford the real cheap one, then you can, that's what you can do. Optionally, I guess professionals will use sandbags to weigh down the tripod. You basically want to weigh down the tripod so that if you do hit it, it doesn't really go anywhere. But a hack is just to hot glue the tripod's feet to the floor, which is what I do more often actually, than using sandbags. But yeah, and be aware of where you place your camera and where you're going to be animating, because sometimes, it can be hard to get a good shot and be able to get in there and still animate at the same time. So tripod and attaching the tripod to the floor. USB cable to attach the camera to the computer. This you probably already have. I had to get an extender because some USB cables are not actually that long. I had to get an extension cable for USB, and that was like $5 on Amazon. So, like I mentioned, it's best to use a Nikon camera lens with your Canon camera if possible. Canon causes that light flicker in the final image sequence, which you might not notice if you're not looking for it, but I don't know. If you can, go for a Nikon camera lens. I mean, they're going to be pretty much the same price as a Canon camera lens anyway. So, but DSLR lenses are available in focal lengths 18mm to 300mm. I'll do a video talking about lenses, cameras and lenses, so you'll understand what the heck that means. An 18mm basically is a wide lens, whereas a 300mm is a long lens, and they have different properties. They create different levels of blur and sharpness in an image. They might distort the image a little bit more or less in different ways. So they just have different qualities. And we'll talk about that. The most common lens to use for stop motion is the 35mm. You can do an entire film with a 35mm, and it's perfectly fine. You could use a 50mm also, but 35 is pretty much standard. So if you're starting out, get a camera and get a 35mm lens. The other focal lengths are ones that you might use for different effects or different like specialty shots. Also, in lieu of multiple lenses, you can use a single zoom lens, which adjusts. It can be 24mm, or it can adjust up to 200, or maybe it's 55 and it can adjust up to 300. Obviously, there are pros and cons of using a zoom lens. But the lens that I've been using, standard must-have, is the 35mm, and those average about 150 to 300, something like that. If you get a really fancy one, maybe it's more expensive than that. But yeah, like I said, get a 35mm lens and the camera, and you're pretty much set, unless you want to do real fancy stuff. Specialty lenses, if you want to get them, are fisheye lenses. Tilt shift lenses are really cool. It's hard to explain, but they make a life-scale scene look like a miniature replica. So I'm going to have to talk about that in the lenses episode, because tilt shift is pretty awesome. But you wouldn't really use that for actually filming in stop motion, nor would you really use a fisheye lens. But those are just specialty lenses that exist in the universe. So if you're using a Nikon lens with the Canon camera, you need a converter to attach the Nikon lens to the Canon camera. And that, I got one for like 15 bucks. Not a big deal. So ideally you want to have some like professional lights, but I know plenty of people who have done like serious thesis student films with everyday around the house kind of lights. But if you do have the potential, if you have the money, and if you do have the availability to get some professional lights, that's always ideal. That's always better. So there's an overhead mounted softbox light. So that's your basic RE stage light, but it has like a fabric box around it that creates like a really nice, it's like a softened light coming from above that can be very similar to like daylight basically. And so a softbox light can be as cheap as like 20 bucks, which I don't know if you want to get a 20-buck one, or they can be like pretty expensive, like 150, something like that. These numbers here aren't necessarily accurate. And then theoretically you want to have 3-point lighting, so you could have 3 RE lights, usually around a 150 is good. That's a smaller size. The bigger the number gets, the bigger the actual light itself gets. So it's ideal to have 3-point lighting with RE lights, but again, if you have household lights, make it work, you know. So, and then of course you'll need some extension cords and a lot of power outlets, that's for sure. So if you wanted to get started with stop motion and be kind of low tech about it and start from scratch, you could get a tripod for 20 bucks and you could get a camera, hopefully with a lens, for 60 to 100. And then you could use free software, and you probably already own a computer, a USB cable, and some household lights. So you could get started with stop motion from scratch with spending about 80 to 120 bucks, which is pretty good. It's not too bad. If you want to go all out, it would obviously cost a lot more than that. So yeah, so we talked about the kind of cameras that Dragon Frame supports. I'm sure every new version of Dragon Frame supports more and more cameras. So you can hook up to USB webcams too, which is great. So if you want to hook up to a webcam or iPhone or iPad, there are also opportunities there for that.